Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. Will the Philippines, Taiwan's southern neighbour, get involved in a Taiwan contingency? With me to discuss this are Tony Hu, former US Department of Defense Senior Director for China, Taiwan and Mongolia, and Sana Hashmi, Taiwan Asia Exchange Foundation Postdoctoral Fellow, and Charles Wu, National Zhengzhi University Diplomacy Professor. Tony, Sana, Charles, very warm welcome to the show today. The US has not proposed involving the Philippines in the defense of Taiwan, says Ferdinand Marcos Jr. in an interview with Reuters. The Philippines president said that granting the US access to a further 4 military bases was a, quote, defensive posture in the event of a Chinese invasion. Marcos was speaking at the end of his visit to Washington. The trip included an upgrade to the two countries' nearly 72-year security alliance. The president didn't respond directly to Reuters when asked, in the event of a Chinese attack, whether the US could place weapons at the military sites.
Whilst the tensions across the Taiwan Straits seem to be continuing to increase, then the safety of our Filipino nationals in Taiwan becomes of primordial importance. And so that these EDCA sites will also prove to be useful for us should that terrible occurrence come about.
EDCA stands for the Joint US-Philippine Defense Agreement known as Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, with the US saying the sites help both sides work together better to respond to disasters, among other things. Sana, let me come to you first. What was your reaction when you heard this interview?
Definitely the concern is about the Filipino citizens, and Taiwan is a home to more than 100,000 of Filipino citizens. But then since it's a part of the Enhanced Defense Agreement, Cooperation Agreement, there are definitely strategic objectives behind it. No matter what the US side says and no matter what the Philippine side say, we know that there are reasons why Philippines is doing it, and now the US has access to 4 more naval bases, and that are much more strategically important than the previous bases. And of course we have to address the elephant in the room, that is the Taiwan contingency and potential invasion of China. So I think it's too early to say if the Philippines will be playing a role and what role these naval bases are going to play, but I think it all depends on how the regional situation is going to be when there is a potential Taiwan contingency. But I think if we just keep these recent developments in mind, I would say that definitely US is thinking about how to utilize the territories of its allies in the region.
Tony, what do these 4 extra bases mean to you?
I think what Marco's is trying to say is trying to appease China a bit, but in reality they have strategic meanings, obviously. In this case,
there's a few in the northern
right,
northern
exactly.
part of the Philippines.
It's mostly of the 4, 3 of them are in the north, and all 3 of them are critical locations. One is actually a port that will help U.S. Navy. The other locations will be important for preposition. One of them is the airbase. So there will be preposition equipments, buildings and runway will be refurbished. All of this serves the purpose of further deter China, because now that even in southern Taiwan, the U.S. forces will have a foothold inside of China's anti-access area denial strategy, inside of it. So it's going to be very difficult for them to deny coalition forces from coming to Taiwan's aid. So hopefully something like this will further enhance deterrence, further assure peace, so that we don't suffer a terrible war.
Charles, what was your reaction when you heard the interview?
This is very important. We need to go back to see the contents of EDCA. So EDCA is an agreement allowing the United States to deploy troops and also let the United States facilitate and operate some weapons in the Philippines bases.
But it's a temporary sort of rotation through these bases, right?
Yeah,
not permanent.
Yeah, no permanent. But it's very important for the strategic purposes, and also like both of them mentioned about the deterrence to China. But we know that this agreement was signed under Duterte in 2014. However, because Duterte used a more pro-China strategy, so they lapsed this agreement, and now they come, the Marcos and also the United States bring it back and want to enforce and also put it into work. So I think this is a very important framework. Also, we need to pay attention to how United States and Japan, United States and South Korea, now this is another puzzle try to be combined into we call the hub and spoke framework under Biden administration. how he used this kind of allies framework to deter China's expansion in the future.
Absolutely. Charles mentioned, this agreement actually was going to be revoked by Duterte, but now instead under Marcos, it's actually been refreshed. We've had the release by the US of new guidelines for the defense treaty. What do these mean in practice, Tony?
Actually, all it does is reemphasize what is considered an attack. So it specifically mentions South China Sea and Coast Guard and stuff. So
no changes, just
no
more
real
definition.
changes, because the Mutual Defense Treaty is the overarching agreement. So if attack on one, it's attack on the other. This means if China continues its bullying activities against the Philippines, the United States is obligated to help. Conversely, if China decides to execute an attack on Taiwan and take action against U.S. forces in Guam or U.S. bases in Japan, then Filipino will offer help, because that's part of that Mutual Defense Treaty. So basically, this is re-announcement of the tie, because Duterte has pretty much trying to kill it. And now Marcos has decided, well, I went to China and I didn't get a good reception, and they refused to stop the bullying activity against my fishermen. Now I decided to pick side.
So do you think that the Philippines, essentially that's honoring their part of the bargain?
Right.
Is that, if they get more security, more defense from the US, then they, in a Taiwan contingency, they would also need to be drawn in, their military drawn into the conflict.
Right. Actually, this is a win-win. If you look at that new document, it says United States will assist Filipino military to modernize, to develop interoperability. What does that mean? That means to develop a means to fight together. So in what scenario will Filipinos fight together with the United States? Of course, defense of the Filipino claim and against Chinese bullying, and maybe in a Taiwan scenario. So this is the important part. I think people should look at the new announcement, U.S. involvement in helping Filipino plan on modernization and to develop interoperability of the two forces.
Charles, so Tony there laid out, essentially, we're talking about mutual defense treaty. And yet, Marcos, at his CSIS, Center for Strategic and International Studies event, said explicitly that the bases would not be used for offensive purposes. How do you read what he's saying here? Is there a contradiction?
Actually, I think Marcos wants more security commitment from the United States. I think it's for sure, because there's some historical issues between United States and Filipinos cooperations. Now they want to strengthen this kind of security cooperation again, and I think United States security commitment is very important, because if United States, Washington can maintain their security assurances, and Marcos, he will have more bargaining chips against China on the South China Sea issues, and also especially Marcos, he also wants economic cooperations or trade with mainland China. So I think Marcos play kind of two-hand strategies. One is getting United States security assurance. Another is try to negotiate with China how to solve the South China Sea disputes peacefully, and how to jointly develop these areas, and also how they want to more economic cooperation in the future.
We have to remember that US is still the security provider, specifically in the Southeast Asian region and with respect to South China Sea. And specifically what China has been doing with respect to Taiwan, there is a wake-up call for all these countries, specifically Philippines. Under Marcos, we are seeing a new Philippines. So even if we talk about Taiwan contingency, I don't think we really can exclude a South China Sea dimension. So even if we today say that these countries are neutral, and if tomorrow China invades Taiwan and these countries are going to be neutral, I don't think, because this is just happening in your backyard. So I definitely feel that US might have an upper hand, specifically now with this updated defense agreement.
Let's now go to essentially a quote from the new guidelines that were released by the US. We can show some of the wording there. And it says that we reaffirm an armed attack on either country in the Pacific, including anywhere in the South China Sea, on vessels, aircraft, or forces, including coast guards, would invoke mutual defense commitments. Tony, let me end with you. So do you see this as Marcos introducing a kind of strategic ambiguity himself in terms of whether the Philippines would come to the aid of Taiwan.
He obviously needs to maintain a non-commitment to a conflict outside of his country right now. However, when the United States come under attack, then under Mutual Defense Treaty, he would have to get involved, or he should, he's obligated to get involved. So I think, as Professor Wood mentioned, he's playing a double-handed move, not to piss off China totally, but yet let China know, I have a big friend with a big stick.
Manila requested the update to its security guidelines with the US following a series of clashes in the South China Sea between its Coast Guard and Chinese vessels. China claims everything within its so-called 9-dash line, stretching around 5,000 kilometers south of its coast, despite a 2016 International Tribunal ruling China's claims were illegal. But under international law, each country has an exclusive economic zone of 200 nautical miles or 370 kilometers off its coast. You can see there by the blue lines where they are permitted to fish and explore for oil, for example. We also highlight on this map Taiping Island, which is claimed by Taiwan under actually the same historical claim as China. Now, many analysts say the South China Sea is valuable to China for its resources, but Greg Poling, a senior fellow and director of the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative, disagrees.
The resources are a bit of a red herring. If you took every drop of oil known to exist in the South China Sea and you dropped it in China tomorrow, it accounts for about 2 years of daily oil consumption. The natural gas can really only be piped to the nearest coastline, so Philippine gas only helps the Philippines. Vietnamese gas only helps Vietnam. So it's not about oil and gas to China. It's also not about fish. Chinese fishermen do not fish commercially in the South China Sea. They only operate because they're subsidized.
Gregory Poling, Senior Fellow and Director at CSIS. Let's quickly hear from President Marcos for the Philippine perspective.
As I explained to President Xi, it is the first year. Last year was the first year in the entire history of the Philippines where we had to import fish, which is a ridiculous situation for a country that consists of 7,100 plus islands. And these are areas that have been fished by our fishermen and our fisherfolk for 20, 30 generations. And they cannot understand why they are not allowed to fish there, why they are being blockaded away from there.
Marcos Jr. there. Sana, Gregory Poling says the resources are not that vast in the South China Sea, and yet it's the very first year, as we heard there, that the Philippines was required to actually import fish to feed its population. What's going on?
Well, I definitely agree with Poling. It is an important reason, but it is not the primary reason why China has been so hell-bent on claiming the South China Sea, the entire South China Sea, in fact. So, as President Marcos also said, it is the home of the most fishing vessels in the world. So, of course, that's an important region, but for China, there are other strategic reasons and economic reasons as well. As it is one of the main sea lanes of communication, and then 80% of the seaborne trade passes through it. So, if China controls the South China Sea, that means China is actually effectively controlling the commercial activities of most of the major countries in the world.
So, are you saying that they would block trade? Is that the leverage that they have?
Definitely going to be disruption. But apart from that, there are strategic reasons as well. For the patrol of the SSBNs and then in Taiwan contingency, it is going to be a buffer zone for China. So there are important reasons for China to claim South China Sea. But apart from that, it has hardly been about territory. It has hardly been about resources. China could claim anything and everything under the sun. So this is what has been happening with China.
Charles, do you believe that the leverage, when we talk about, if China controlled the South China Sea, what are we saying in terms of how this threatens global trade?
Okay, it's a good question. I mean, when we talk about South China Sea, it's about the issue and topic of territory. When we talk about territory, there's two very important elements of territory. One is tangible elements, and another one is intangible. When we say tangible, is everything above the territory. You can have economic activities, you can grow the agricultures, and you can make money, even make human habitations. Fishing also belongs to one of the tangible. Right. Intangible effects of territory is nationalism or national identity. So no matter which kind of countries leaders, they will not sacrifice or lose any dash of their territory.
So you're saying this is what China is focused on, the intangible?
Yes, they both focus on tangible and also intangible, because if you look at the sea channel from the Cross Strait to South China Sea to the Indian Ocean, there's hundreds of cargoes of fishing ships every day. So if China block the strait, there's one very important thing is they will get international attentions.
So this is what I want to get to. Do you actually believe that China, what is the scenario where they would block international trade?
There's only one scenario: if there's any military conflicts occurred in this strait, they will block it. But this will create a side effect, because if China still plays this kind of assertive, violent behavior, it will create a bad reputation for Chinese government in the future. It's not only create bad reputation for from the democratic country, but will create bad reputation from authoritarian or non-democratic countries.
Yeah, ASEAN
so that's why
countries.
China will not do this one in the future, I think.
Okay, Tony.
As Dr. Hashmi mentioned earlier about the sea lines of communication, it is absolutely critical. If China controls South China Sea and control these sea lines of communication, they can pretty much coerce any country that depends on that for their livelihood. They can selectively have inspection regimes, stop ships that's going to Japan, stop ships that's going
Which incidentally is what they did after Nancy Pelosi's visit, and also
precisely. They can
post
be
the Kevin
selective
McCarthy.
and be able to coerce countries who depend on it. Plus,
And these countries would be Malaysia and Singapore, have no other route.
well, remember, that route also brings to Middle East and Europe, trades with Asia. So any country who trades with the countries in the region and have ships that go through South China Sea, either to or from, will be impacted. So that's the important thing. As we mentioned earlier, it's not really about resources. It's about control. The ability, if I control South China Sea, I can use that control to coerce, to direct policies. If you don't listen to me, I'm going to make life difficult for you. Plus, Philippines is an archipelago state. Their livelihood depends on the sea. The 9-dash line takes away over 90% of their EEZ in South China Sea. And that's where Marcos is saying we're importing fish because you're blocking us from fishing in what should be ours. China is a member of the United Nations, yet it denies the ruling of the United Nations Permanent Court of Arbitration in 2016, saying that dash line is not lawful. So that is also a very bad image for China. I think the free world should publicize it. You're a member of the United Nations, yet you do not adhere to the United Nations court's ruling.
So as we mentioned, the China Sea is a vital gateway for global trade, and an estimated 1/3 of all global trade passes through it every year. Let's hear again from Marcos Jr. referring to the joint Philippine cruises, freedom of operation navigations with the US, Australia, Japan and South Korea that will start this year.
The purpose of all of these actions is to preserve the freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, for the simple reason that a great deal of trade goes through that part of the world. And it does not affect only Asia or ASEAN or China, but it affects the rest of the world as well.
Sana, these are freedom of navigation operations, basically sail-throughs, transits. What can they actually do, to deter China? Wouldn't there be something more permanent needed?
As in, I think it's a start, and this is what the US has been doing for NOBs, and I think US has also got kind of approval of the countries in the region, because we see there's a lot of port visits by the US ships as well. But I feel we are putting a lot of pressure on the US as well. As in, of course, US is the major security provider, but then we have other countries who are equally concerned about Chinese activities and who are very much a part of the region. Definitely, Japan has been doing a lot of activities. Its defense expenditure is increasing. Now we are seeing we have AUKUS with Australia, and then this is going to be major deterrence. But apart from that, we're also seeing that countries such as India and even ASEAN countries are doing a lot together. Recently concluded India-ASEAN maritime exercise, I think it's one of the examples, and it's not a military exercise. Of course, it's a military exercise, but not for traditional usage. They said that it's primarily to deal with non-traditional security threat. So, this is what is China doing. So, this is what other countries have been doing. So, I feel that a collective effort from other countries need to be there, and it's happening.
It is, yeah. Charles, that brings me to my next question. Do you think that, China will be worrying that what the Philippines is doing could embolden other ASEAN, other claimants?
I mean, this is one thing we need to know is when you look at ASEAN countries, we should view them as one unit because they have ASEAN centrality, they have ASEAN way, and they want to have their foreign policies go very similar to the same direction, which is they want to bring all the great power into the region. They call omni-enmeshment, or we call hedging strategies. However, since Philippines has this kind of very, the South China Sea issue with China, this is one thing we need to look at how the Filipino government and China, they try to work it together to make it more peaceful. You remember this January, Marcos visit Beijing. They talk about the joint marine seismic understanding. They try to bring the joint development on the oil and gas issues together. However, one thing they need to negotiate is how to split the revenues on the gas and the oil. But I think they start to kind of prepare this kind of more peaceful negotiation and make the South China Sea issues not that intensive. So they call this one called shelving differences and seeking joint developments. However, when you talk about interests, it's always very hard to have the same interest on this one areas.
Yeah.
You always want to get more. This is from really say you always
Sure.
want to have more relative gains.
Yeah.
So how use more diplomatic way, not the violent way or military way to solve these areas issues, I think is very important for Marcos.
Yeah, but I mean, you mentioned the trip to Beijing, but since then, there have been numerous incidents where there's still harassment of the Philippines, fishermen and Coast Guard.
Yeah.
So do you have much hope for this? Should we continue hoping and waiting for?
This kind of military activities, this kind of harassment is kept going on for the past decades. If you really remember correctly, 2021, there's a Windsong Reef. This kind of incidents between Filipino government, Filipino fishermen, and Chinese militias. And suddenly we found there would be another war occurred. But I think Chinese government and also Filipino government, they try to settle down, make it calm, don't make it into any kind of military interstate disputes or even escalate this dispute into a war. So I think both governments, they have consensus how to use this framework of joint developments and also sharing differences as a framework and focus on business. I think this is how the two governments right now want to do. But I want to say this, is Filipino government, they know how to use American playing another security cards as a deterrence and telling the Beijing, yes, we have big stick behind us.
Yes, exactly. Tony.
It is truly unfortunate that the ASEAN as a bloc couldn't unite on this particular issue because so many countries in ASEAN are impacted by this 9-dash line. However, China has successfully infiltrated ASEAN. Countries like Cambodia are firmly on China's side. That prevents that unity. Because if ASEAN act together, they might receive some kind of agreement from China, but because they couldn't act together, I think they are ineffective in this particular issue.
But do you think that these recent developments with the Philippines, would it help to embolden?
No, because there are some countries that is so firmly in China's pocket that China has stated, I'm willing to do bilateral negotiation with you guys, but I would not negotiate as a bloc with ASEAN. So, and that is a weakness for all the other countries when they cannot unite against a big guy like China.
Absolutely. Now, the US says China has fully militarized 3 disputed islands, turning them into military bases armed with fighter jets and anti-ship and anti-aircraft missile systems and laser and jamming equipment. My next guest is James R. Holmes, US Naval War College's J.C. Wiley Chair of Maritime Strategy, who explains why.
The closer relations we have with Japan in the north and the Philippines in the south, I mean, that gives us the ability, it gives us the option to potentially close off the first island chain to maritime movement between the China Seas and the Western Pacific. And if we can do that, we can confine the PLA Navy and PLA Air Force to those waters and skies. That really gives us a lot of advantages from creating a barrier behind which we can move up and down the first island chain in the Western Pacific, and also just to give us the opportunity to shoot down that Air Force and sink that Navy if our leadership deems it wise. So there's, with respect to the Philippines, that also gives us staging points for military power, close to points of impact in the South China Sea as we wage this gray zone competition, as China tries to make its claims to indisputable sovereignty over those waters a reality.
How do you see the militarization of the South China Sea?
It's all about trying to create a permanent military presence in the South China Sea, hundreds of miles from China's shores. In peacetime, basically meaning that Beijing makes the rules that govern what happens in those waters and others obey. So in a sense, we are looking at a potential annulment of the law of the sea in the South China Sea. And that would give China great benefits from being able to forbid military exercises and other military activities in the South China Sea, the ability to exploit the resources within the South China Sea, and also the ability to have that sort of safe bastion to operate ballistic missile submarines, nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, able to target the United States and potentially other powers that China would like to deter from those safe surroundings.
What can, say, the US do about this militarization?
China, in a sense, is trying to overthrow the law of the sea, basically through insurgent methods. The way to try to counter this is by using counterinsurgent methods. If you want to counter somebody's effort to take territory, you have to be on the scene in order to counter that. You can't do it from over the horizon. You can't do it from Guam. You can't do it from anywhere far from the scene of conflict. We need to figure out ways to get forces, whether it's Navy, Marine, U.S. Coast Guard, regional Coast Guards, out to the scene to actually face down what China has done in the guise of its fishing fleet, its maritime militia, and its Coast Guard.
You've written a lot about China using a form of lawfare in relation to the South China Sea. Again, can you tell me more about how they do this and what you believe the response should be to that?
The Chinese, they call this the three warfares. The use of media, psychological, and lawfare means to shape opinion in the international system in China's favor on a 24/7, 365 basis. So this is an all-consuming thing on China's part to shape the surroundings in its favor. China is a charter member of the Law of the Sea Treaty, but at the same time, it's essentially trying to nullify that in its favor in the South China Sea, just because it can, just because it's strong, because it thinks it is strong enough to face down its regional competitors and potentially their outside backers, such as the United States or Australia, Japan, whoever the case may be. I was really shocked in 2016 how strong the ruling out of The Hague, the Permanent Court of Arbitration, was in the Philippines' favor when it took China to that tribunal over its claims in the South China Sea. China has basically refused to abide by that. I always hesitate to make this comparison because what China is doing is an order of magnitude more aggressive than what the United States did in the 19th and early 20th centuries in the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico. We had the Monroe Doctrine. We basically insisted that European powers expelled from the Western Hemisphere by a series of revolutions in the early 19th century could not come back and reimpose control of those countries either directly or indirectly. We were hard-headed about it. We were more and more assertive about it as that century went on. Now, the United States was not claiming to essentially own the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf, let alone the islands in there.
And so it seems that the solution to this is for the claimants and also powers like the US to group together.
In my view, I sort of have macro level and micro level goals. The micro level goal is to look at the situation through the eyes of a Philippine or a Vietnamese or perhaps an Indonesian fisherman who's constantly having to face off against the Chinese maritime militia and Coast Guard, all backed by the PLA Navy and shore-based instruments of sea power. That our micro level goal needs to give that person heart to go out and then ply his living, make a living for his family, so that he can ultimately make his nation prosperous. On the macro level, that translates into we need to try to help our regional friends, allies, and partners become fully sovereign, able to exercise their prerogatives under the law of the sea and under their other prerogatives that go with being sovereign states. If we can do that, at that point, we've pushed back effectively against what China's trying to do in the gray zone.
And do you think that the US not being party to this law of the sea, Do you think that that has any impact?
From a legal standpoint, it doesn't actually really matter all that much. Because the United States has long, since the 1980s, accepted the law of the sea treaty as customary international law. Well, what states do is as valid a source of international law as what they write on pieces of paper and sign. So treaty law. The United States has actually gone along with that, even though the United States Senate has not consented to the law of the sea treaty. So from a legal standpoint, I don't think anybody thinks that we violate the law of the sea, and we are certainly the primary enforcer of the law of the sea. It's a weird situation because the primary subverter of the law of the sea is within the arrangement, namely China, and the primary enforcement of the arrangement it's outside it from a treaty law standpoint, namely the United States.
Holmes of US Naval War College speaking with me earlier. Sana, if I could come to you again. So do you see what China's doing in terms of insurgency, like James Holmes said?
China has been doing it at least since Xi Jinping came to power, and at least since 2016, I think countries have started paying attention. But this has been going on a very, very long time. I believe what went wrong was that it went unchecked. There was no accountability from a lot of countries' side. Now, US is doing counter-insurgency, maritime counter-insurgency, but then we need more countries to do that. Because how much could you really justify what the US has been doing? Then it could just be labeled as warmongering in the South China Sea, and an outsider power is coming and then creating problems. So then I believe when we talk about counter-insurgency, and it's a mix of both traditional and non-traditional ways of deterring China. So definitely, I believe that there could be a collective effort from different countries, and I believe that the effort should come from the US as well as from the Southeast Asian claimants, not just from one country.
Tony, let me just quote from James Holmes's site when they talk about this insurgency. They say, insurgencies are campaigns that seek to overthrow an established regime or legal order by cumulatively and coercively enforcing a new set of laws. Now, as Sana said, this is precisely what China has been trying to do.
Precisely. In 2015, when Xi Jinping visited President Obama in the White House, he made a commitment not to militarize these islands. But yet, starting in 2016, they started having big caliber guns and now missiles there. And if you look at these islands, they are building up the fuel storage facilities, aircraft hangars, and dormitories. You can see they're about to station troops there. As a matter of fact, I would not be surprised if in some of these islands that doesn't have runways, they start to immigrate fishermen from Guangdong and from Hainan Island to these other islands to legitimize China's night.
It seems that it's already happening.
It's already happening. So this is the type of things that they are, insurgencies that's been described. Unfortunately, it stay unchecked, as you mentioned. In fact, when I was in the Pentagon in 2005, when China starts building these hexagon buildings on top of these coral reefs, I asked the Chinese attaché, what is this? Oh, it's a shelter for fishermen. Then you see them connect up, 5, 6, 10 of these buildings, and then dredgers showed up. I raised the flag, but once again, nobody responded. By the time they did it so fast, they literally built these islands within 2 years. It's done. It's too late. What are you going to do about it? It's already there. They destroyed the coral reefs, destroyed the natural environment, and they established these islands. So now, is it still too late for the world to respond? I'm not sure.
I'd like you actually to address what Sana said, which is we left it, the world or the US, left it go unchecked for too long. Was that because in fact, we can look at it as two strategies. One is the very military build-up, but then on the other hand, there's a more sort of covert, sort of grey zone tactics strategy that's also going on, and perhaps the US took its eye off the ball definitely in terms of that more sort of covert strategy.
Yeah, it was a grey zone activity because the militia, the maritime militia, the private fishing boats that started showing up, started occupying this place, then started to cover up for those military activities. So the world actually took our eyes off it, thinking, okay, it's just for fishermen's safety. It's okay until it's not okay. And when it's not okay, everybody try to appease China, try to talk to China, and it's actually at this point it's very difficult to dislodge China from those islands and prevent China from expanding, colonizing, and immigrating people, as they are doing with Tibet, where they bring behind people through railway to mix the race. They're doing similar things in in South China Sea, where they start having more and more people. They're going to get them to settle in those islands that they made.
Absolutely. Now, Charles, Beijing is not just building military facilities. This is Woody Island, we're showing you on the map now, which is part of the disputed Paracel Islands, where it's reported that China is opening a new restaurant. Now, of course, they are also building schools, hospitals, post offices on Yongxing Island. What do you make of this? Is this sort of a military-civilian dual strategy going on?
Yeah, I think the Chinese naval powers try to build the military facilities, is for sure. They build the service to the SAAM military missiles on the Woody Island. They did the same thing on the Subi Island, on the Mischief, okay, and also on all other islands. They are not only militarized, these islands, they also want to build some civilians facility. For example, like we mentioned, the dorms, they have schools. The schools is for elementary school, for vocational training, and also for other uses. And also they have movie theaters on that.
Right.
So they want to make a kind of phenomenon that this is they want to sustain human habitations, and also they can create some economic activities and revenues on the island.
And like Tony said, I mean, once people are living there,
yes,
it's very hard to
and they even bring the tourists to the island. So they want to make the island as a full-fledged island, which means they can claim their rights for the EEZ zone and also continental shelf. So in one time they can consolidate this kind of island and the rights, and they'll do a lot of things on we call the South China Sea, the free passage rights. So we need to look at how Chinese government and also foreign policy, sometimes they will do one thing, say another. So this is why people criticize the international society. They forgot the Chinese, how they try to manipulate their kind of, their territory and their international influences.
Sana, so this is almost winning the war without fighting.
This is what China has been doing, and I think it's a very old strategy. You get your people, you popularize it, and then it's your territory. You have another claim on the territory. You can consolidate your claim, and China has been doing this with India as well. If you look at the LAC, this is what they have been doing. They have been establishing villages. So get people there, the territory becomes yours.
Tony, very last question. So, how much control in practice does China have currently over the South China Sea?
They have significant control, unfortunately.
60%?
I would say, yeah, probably 60%, because the location of the sporadic islands, the ones that they have occupied, and the places where they have airstrips, where they have support for their ships, they can power projection the entire area if they want to. Right now they haven't actually deployed more military assets. They have the Coast Guards there, and they have their civilian militia, maritime militias there. If you look at any one time, all of these islands, they will have hundreds of these fishing fleets there. Those fleets actually is doing the bidding of the PRC Navy to show presence, to chase away other fishermen from other countries. So
another strand of the military-civilian strategy.
Exactly, exactly. So do they have control? If you count those civilian militia, they have significant control.
Charles, what do you make of the comparison that James Holmes made between what the US did in the 1800s in terms of not allowing the expelled powers, the colonial powers, to come back and retake control of Central and Southern America? How does that compare to what China is doing today in the South China Sea, which James Holmes says is more aggressive?
When we talk about the United States, America's mineral doctrines is try to maintain their hegemony within the regions and also try to be protectionist, anti-colonist. Then right now, China, now they have developed, they want to control their power within regions, and all the kind of like, foreign policies they probably copy from the United States. What they did before, they want to maintain their hegemon. Chinese government want to maintain the hegemon within these regions, made Asia as Asians Asia. And they don't want any kind of Western power to intervene these areas to challenge China's hegemon status.
And Tony, do you do you agree with James Holmes when he says that China is more aggressive?
Absolutely, China's more aggressive because United States' intent with Monroe Doctrine was anti-colonialism to prevent other countries colonizing in Central and South America. China, on the other hand, is occupation. The actual occupation by themselves of a whole large area on the geography map. So that's quite different.
Now, while Taiwan is under threat from China, its arms supply is being held up by a backlog of around $18 billion in weapons, paid to the US but undelivered. America is Taiwan's main source of weapons, but since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, military supplies are going to urgently arm Ukraine. Now, in early May, Taiwan received a 25-person delegation from the US's defense industry. Tony, let me ask you, so according to the Nikkei, the last such delegation was about 4 years ago. So what do you make of the timing now?
Actually, 4 years ago might not be true. There have been different delegations from U.S. defense industry that visited Taiwan almost annually, but not in such a large group. I believe why they're coming now, it is because the political environment in Washington, D.C. has changed, become very much pro-Taiwan and recognize the importance of making sure Taiwan has a greater defense capability. So the defense industry recognizing that the political environment is driving the change in the business environment. That means most likely they can get easier approval for export licenses to Taiwan. So I think
some here in Taiwan have cast this in a negative light. They said that basically the U.S. Defense industry has come over to
make
profit.
money.
Yeah,
I saw that. It's so foolish because basically this industry, they are looking for a better, cheaper, faster way in their manufacturing process, and how Taiwan can fit into that. Allow Taiwan to be part of the supply chain, basically giving Taiwan industry an opportunity to participate in making of defense articles and services. So no, this is giving Taiwan an opportunity because the defense industry in the United States have partnership with many European countries and Japan and Korea, and now that there's an opening for Taiwan, and this is good opportunity. And I think they're here basically looking for partners. They're going to look at Taiwan's industrial capability, basically look at the precision machineries. Do you have that raw material availability? Then they're going to look at the production environment. Does Taiwan have a stable power and water, electricity, water?
And it probably has a lot of this from its, from its semiconductor manufacturing.
There are a lot of existing systems that they can reference from. Another thing that they look at, these are the things that I used to look at when I was in Raytheon. One of them is the workforce. I can have all this stuff if I don't have a ready workforce that's available, that's educated, got a really good skill set. So these are the things that this 25 company delegation is looking for. Does Taiwan have those? Then also they allow, I went to the conference, and you see how they establish linkage between individual companies. You make batteries, I need batteries. What kind of battery and what's capability? So have the direct talks, the interaction. So this report about U.S. coming to sell stuff, no. U.S. coming to looking for partners. These companies are looking for partners. They're not selling anything. They're trying to make a partner with something so that they can make more money and Taiwan can make more money. It's a win-win.
Tony, so if we can, bring home the benefits of Taiwan, stepping up, becoming a parts manufacturer, can we draw any parallels with other industries? Absolutely.
If you look at the automotive industry, for example, Toyota and Nissan, they have plants in Taiwan that make parts. So when your Toyota and Nissan breaks down, they buy the local manufactured part. Actually, I drive a locally manufactured car. because of the convenience of the availability of these type of things, and it doesn't cost an arm and a leg. So
and it still works?
It still works, and it works perfectly. So in this case, Taiwan has done a great deal of things with F-16 because Hanxiang AIDC is upgrading the current AB to V, so they make many of the parts. Same thing needs to happen with other weapon systems.
So we talked about the supply chain, basically Taiwan getting in on this very important supply chain. How about the other side? What benefits would it bring to Taiwan's own arms capabilities?
Good question. And I think the Taiwan industry and MND should work together and look at this, because what Taiwan needs are ability to make components and parts for the system Taiwan currently have.
So
way,
what types of systems?
You know, Patriot missile system, for example, and F-16 circuit cards, okay? Different weapons, tanks, missiles. The stuff that Taiwan bought from the United States, what components and parts Taiwan can make here, so when something breaks, they don't have to wait for 2 months, 3 months for the parts to get here while the system is down. They need to have the ability to make the parts here, stockpile it here. So we just saw on the TV the Apache helicopter, for example. You know, components for those things that Taiwan already own should be the higher priority than be looking for something new or looking to build an entire system. I want to build a new jet fighter in Taiwan. No. You want to build a part for the F-16, a part for whatever other system, the K-class ships. So this is the opportunity that they should take advantage of.
Give us some real-world examples. Let's have a look at Ukraine. What weapon systems there they cannot use because they don't have the parts?
Well, right now, unfortunately, the war is going on. When the war's going on, you are consuming weapon, not necessarily repairing weapon. So that's not a good example because during war, if you don't have a part that's already there for you to stick in the system so make it work, you don't have time to make it. You're fighting.
Well, no, but to have the additional parts already here on Taiwan.
That's critical because Ukrainian used to have Russian systems.
Right.
So right now, Western systems going in and going straight into fighting. So I don't expect them to have a lot of stockpile of Western weapons parts on stock. That's the unfortunate part. Right now, they're still operating some of the MiG jets because they have parts for the MiGs. And Ukrainian industry actually was very strong as was part of the huge defense industry for Russia.
Yeah.
So they have many parts for the Russian system, but the new Western system that's going in, like the Leopard tanks, you know, and like the Stinger missile or Javelin missiles, they don't have parts for.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Tony, Sana, and Charles, for your time today. Hello, I'm Ian Kavat of Taiwan Talks. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Feel free to leave us any feedback in the comments section.